Hey, discerning listeners, Love is Blind. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Keep in mind that everything I say is completely speculative based on an edited reality TV show. Let's watch.
Brendan's like telling me, like, I'm in love with you. It's been you since day one. You are my person. And I literally was like, no. If that's what you want, then fight for me. But no, he wants everything to be easy. He wants everything to be handed to him.
Ick. That was edited, but what? That was edited, but come on. What? So Annie breaks up with Brendan. He was devastated by it. We saw it in the lounge. Now, how devastated was he on the scale of things? I don't know. It looked like pretty devastated. At the very least, she broke up with him, and he didn't do anything wrong. And now, just a week later, she is telling people as he walks into the party that he's a jerk face because now, I guess if we're using it as a jumping off point, when we feel bad, when we feel ashamed, when we feel guilty, we'll do a lot of things to get out from underneath that. One is to blame the other person for being the recipient of you dumping them. Anyway, I thought I would go to my contact on the show who told me about a lot more that was happening on the show than what was in the edit. And long story short, there were a lot of other love triangles. And Brendan, I think, was, so I wanted to go to this. And I think that they cut it out of the show for time's sake because, you know, this is all in the pods, right? And the pod episodes were a good portion of that first set of episodes. So, you know, things have to be trimmed, I guess. But to me, the season could be twice as long and I would still watch it. I wish that were the case. I wish that it were, or, you know, usually it's like 12 episodes or something. Just make 5 more, or 8 more, or 3 more or something and just include this kind of stuff. But anyway, so what she told me, my contact on the show, was there were way more complicated love triangles and squares and pentagons in the pods than were shown. Anton, so Anton and Allie, had another person he dated, Kaylin. I think we saw a little bit of Kaylin. And Anton dated Kaylin until the very end, right before proposals. So that's interesting that Anton was, you know, really torn about 2 people, Allie and Kaylin, right up until the end. That is not what we saw, right? We just saw a fast track. They were the couple that got engaged in the very first episode. We know that the engagement didn't happen early in the 10 days because all the proposals are on the same day, but they're on the 9th day and then the 10th day, or the 8th day has all the proposals and the 9th day has all the hallways, or the 9th day is the proposals, 10th day, anyway. But Allie had narrowed it down to Anton pretty early on. So interesting. Kaylin also was dating Joe until the end. So Joe and Kaylin were together, and Joe was also into Madison, right? So we didn't see that. Brendan, who they're talking about right now, who had that emotional breakup with Annie on proposal day, was also dating Anastasia, who pretty much got completely cut from the edit, who was also dating Jensen, who got completely cut out. So Joe was really into Madison, but also had a very close second in Anastasia. By proposal day, Anastasia, this person that we never saw really, chose Brendan over Jensen. So Brendan, right? So Anastasia was into Brendan and Jensen and was neck and neck, and then chose Brendan. Brendan was neck and neck between Anastasia and Madison, or sorry, Brendan was between Annie and Anastasia, or right? Yeah. So Brendan had 2 people until the very end, and then went with Annie, and then Annie dumped him to be with someone else. Annie dumped him to be with Nick, right? And obviously Brendan wanted Annie, who chose Nick. I understand why they cut most of it, because the breakups between the people we don't, yeah. So, and I actually asked her a follow-up question about, because the way she was talking in that bit was, it seemed to me like it was kind of hard for her to, she's like, oh, these breakups were hard, you know, because you imagine for the crew, they care about these people. So it was hard for them to watch. And let's see. So I asked her, we went back and forth a lot. So let's see. Yeah. So I asked her, do the crew process their grief or just process the emotions that they're watching, right? It's pretty intense 10 days. And do you cry? Do you feel things when there's breakups? And she's saying, yeah, watching the pod dates, we definitely talk about it afterwards amongst ourselves. Early on in the pod week, there are so many dates going on at the same time that we try to keep up with everything by typing out important or funny moments in our group chat. But once the week goes on, there are longer and fewer dates, so they're able to tune in more to those dates behind the scenes, you know, so they don't just get updates. Because, you know, I was saying earlier in a previous episode about how the crew organizes around particular cast members. So if you're in one of those groups, you might really know one or two people, but not what's happening with all the others. Anyway, but as the couples get kind of narrowed down in the later 10 days, then you can actually witness or be closer. Anyway. And there have been many times where one of us is crying watching a sad or moving moment in whatever pod we're assigned. Oh, that's right. So they're assigned. And those that don't have a pod during that date will tune in and see what's going on. There are definitely some sweet people and compelling storylines that we quietly root for behind the scenes. So if something happens that doesn't go the way we'd hoped or expected, it can definitely feel like grieving. And then she specifically says the big love triangle between Jensen, Brendan, and Anastasia was definitely one of those for her. So Brendan, Jensen, Anastasia, and Annie, right? It was hard, you know, to see that Anastasia got dumped by Brendan and to see Anastasia dump Jensen. Like, apparently that was pretty rough. And that really adds, right? Because for Brendan to have given up someone, now maybe Brendan is dating Anastasia at this point, who knows? But and then to go for Annie, because in the edit, since we didn't really see much of Brendan's emotions before he was reacting to Annie, because Annie was like, you know, Nick really and I connected, and then, or wait, how did it go? I'm sort of forgetting. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but let's rewind this because I didn't think Annie would have this kind of way.
Let's fucking go.
Brendan's like telling me, like, I'm in love with you. It's been you since day one. You are my person. And I literally was like, no.
Oh, so maybe in light of her finding out, because she would likely find out maybe even in the lounge, right? Because she would hear that Anastasia was trying to choose between Brendan and Jensen, or at the very least that Brendan was into Anastasia and Annie. And then he tells Annie, I was into you since day one. Annie might know. So maybe this is more understandable that Annie's like, no, that's not true. You were into two people at least since the beginning. So what's up with that? So now, do we think that Brendan was lying when he ultimately chose Annie and was very hurt when he got dumped? Do we think he was just making it up? I don't see any reason to think that. So, yeah. So it still is in the category that I was thinking that she feels guilty and she's trying to get out from underneath that instead of just saying, I feel bad, but I didn't do anything wrong, because that's what you're doing in the pods is you might narrow it down to a few people, and you just have to go with the person you're connecting with, and that might mean you're going to hurt somebody. It's not immoral what you did.
If that's what you want, then fight for me. But no, he wants everything to be easy. He wants everything to be handed to him.
And then that statement, like, what's that based on? It was edited, but what does that mean? Ick.
Brendan.
Hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yeah, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are
Good, I'm great.
you? Great.
Yeah.
That's sort of the definition of two-face, right? That you're talking shit about someone, and then to their face, you're just like, "Hi, how's it going?" Yeah, I don't know what I expect, but
In the pods, Brendan was like, I love you so much. You've always been number one. You've always been my highest priority. That is not the energy that is being conveyed here tonight. I 100% know I made the right choice.
what? It was edited, and this thing with Anastasia and Brendan is being edited out, and maybe that's what is influenced. Regardless, though. Now, maybe she regrets deep down. I think that she has a hard time differentiating. I think she has a hard time understanding herself. And there's a chance that a good part of her, given that there's been some issues with Nick, that she is wishing or wondering if she should have gone with Brendan. And then, so if we use my previous analysis of lack of differentiation and parts of the self that are arguing, and you only hear one side, and arguing people and arguing parts of ourselves, if there's lack of integration or sufficient stress or sufficient undifferentiation, each side will become polarized, right? So inside of her, it's possible, who knows, that there's a part of her that's like, should you have been with Brendan? It would make sense that that would be there, right? And especially as she's been with Nick and there's been some worries that she's had, then she would say, shouldn't we have been with Brendan? Did you make the wrong choice? And also another element of that is you hurt him and you're a bad person or whatever, right? Which isn't true, but that sort of attack internally. And then there's another part of her that's like, no, he wasn't that into me. He didn't fight for me. And that's why I'm not with him. He's more into me. And it's Brendan's fault because he didn't show up. So stop hounding me, self. But because of this lack of differentiation and maybe alcohol, and I'll get into the alcohol here in a second because I heard from my contact, I had a lot of questions about alcohol. And that part of her will be the one that gets expressed. I think in her semi-confused, semi-intoxicated, semi-tired bed conversation before they left the getaway, it's one conceptualization of what was happening, because she was arguing with someone, but on the surface she was arguing with Nick. But Nick had no argument. He was, what's happening right now? Why are you saying this? And she seemed to be having an argument with a ghost or herself. And that's lack of differentiation, lack of sophistication, and also a lot of internal black and white, immature ways of seeing the world. Not because someone's a jerk face inherently, but because they haven't had the opportunity to grow up because of what they went through growing up as a child. Anyway, I don't know, but let's rewind this.
I love you so much. You've always been number one. You've always been my highest priority. That is not the energy that is being conveyed here tonight.
And then just think, what? But it's totally in line with what we saw in the pods, where if we go with the conceptualization that due to her abuse or lack of attunement or something, and thus she doesn't have a sense of who she is, she doesn't know what she wants, she might even have experienced a lot of sexism that resulted in her thinking that she is just a vessel for male gaze and love and lust. And so she's not involved in it, right? We understand that a lot of people today and around the world women are socialized that way, that to have lust or desire is irrelevant because they don't matter. It could also be seen as being forward or slutty or something. And so, but that would have to be matched up with a lack of a breeding ground for her early in life to be able to, breeding ground, fertile soil for her to start to explore and grow her sense of self and what she needs and that she matters and knowing what she wants, right? So there's a chance that she literally has no connection with her needs, has no idea what she wants, she doesn't even understand the question. If someone were to ask her, well, who do you want, Nick or Brendan? She's just like, well, huh? But people like that who don't have a connection with the self, they typically don't know that. And so they've just learned to just answer the question as best they can, but it typically doesn't seem to resonate with people. And that's the way it kind of looks to me. I can't know, but there's a fair amount of people that have this condition and it doesn't get talked about enough. Anyway, so, if we think about all that and she's just waiting for some, and she might even feel really bad about herself, shame, low self-esteem. And, she wants people to fulfill that. And at any hint of abandonment or something, or lack of certainty, she crumbles. We've seen that. And when Brendan shows up, she is just like, well, he didn't fight for me, so what else was I supposed to do? When most people would be like, well, one, I feel bad because I broke up with him, but two, he dropped the ball or he didn't emphasize enough. But what's in the past is in the past, or something. She's blaming him. Now she seems intoxicated, and let's talk about that. So I asked about the alcohol bit, so let's get into that. So my context says, yes, sometimes alcohol was removed entirely, access. And there's different phases, right? There's pod, there's hotel, I guess, during the pod. There's the getaway, and then there's when they're back in their lives. When they're back in their lives, they don't have any control. They just show up occasionally. The film crew just shows up occasionally and fills them, and it's very infrequent. They might go for a few days without any camera around. Anyway, so what my contact is saying, and I was actually surprised by this. I would have thought that the producers are like, hey, they're all grown adults. We don't want them to be hammered, but figure it out amongst yourselves, and we'll get in trouble if we don't make things available, right? So food, snacks, water, booze, whatever, bathroom breaks, go for it. It's up to you to decide. To me, that would make a lot of sense, but they do think about the alcohol, so sometimes they do remove acts. The night they moved into the apartments together, most of the cast had pre-gamed pretty hard at the Sequester Hotel. So the Sequester Hotel is when they are sequestered, right? So before moving into the apartments together. So that is after Getaway. And so they're all in that hotel together. Most of the cast had drank a lot. And she says, we normally pick up a 6-pack of beer or bottle of champagne for them, but because of how rowdy they all were, we didn't want to do it that night. So she was saying that alcohol in this season was more happening. Now, does that say something about Colorado? Does that say just something about the cast? Who knows? Ensemble parties were, we're packing. In the pod, in the pod lounges, there's alcohol fairly stocked up, but if things were getting excessive, we'd start packing up the alcohol early. That's interesting. So they just quietly start taking it out of the fridge. Ensemble parties like this, we'd usually tell the bartender to stop serving particular people if we noticed them getting out of hand, but we couldn't fully stop it because the ones being responsible were still allowed to order drinks, and sometimes they'd get sneaky and try to get someone else to order a drink for them. So we just had to keep a super close eye on it for those situations. So we don't know. She's not going to specific, but with Joe being super hammered at that pool party at the Getaway, maybe they went to the bartender and said, hey, stop serving Joe. But if Joe wants to be sneaky about it and ask Jordan, hey, can you order me a drink? So apparently that kind of happens. Yeesh. But there have also been times at ensemble parties, so that must be the term for all these bigger parties, where we have the bartender shut down early. So just, cut it off. Smaller nights out, one-on-one dates, and meet the parents or friends type of outings, we limit alcohol by telling them in advance that we'd only pay for 2 drinks per person, which usually kept them from ordering more because they didn't want to pay for it, but occasionally they'd keep drinking and put it on their own tab. So with the friend date with Anton and Allie and his friend Joe, and I can't remember her name, I think we heard about more than 2 drinks, so Anton might have paid for his own drinks, right? Yeah. And then it's a tricky line to toe with alcohol because once they're back in their hometowns, like right now, they're technically allowed to do whatever they want as far as how they normally live their life. And if that means they're keeping alcohol constantly flowing in their apartments before, during, after filming, that's up to them. But we also have a responsibility to make sure they're safe and also that they're not so drunk that they aren't making sense during filming. So I was asking about this because of what my contact told me about Anna. But I'm going to wait. I think we saw Anna come in, but I'll wait until we see stuff about Anna because there's a whole thing there. But let's get back to the show here. But before that, isn't that interesting? That the approach to alcohol is really complicated, and they are frequently having to cut people off. But they can only go so far, right? Because if they're in the real world, they can't stop them. But they don't want them to drink too much. What the mob will say is that the production is trying to manipulate everything, and they're the ones causing everyone to be hammered, and they're plying them with drinks. And I didn't know. Is that what they're doing? Even if they were doing it, they're all grown adults. If someone doesn't want to drink, just say, I don't want to drink. And honestly, I'm surprised there isn't more drunkenness. If you're in the pods and you don't have anything to do, you don't have to get up in the morning and work, and you're kind of nervous, and there's just food and alcohol and snacks, and you're just kind of lounging around, like it doesn't take many drinks over the span of a couple hours to get, visibly intoxicated. Occasionally we see that, but I'm surprised we don't see it. But when you get to the Anna bit, there's a chance that it does happen more often, but it's not included. I'm swimming upstream when I push back on the mob that makes assumptions that production is nefarious and evil. And, are they out to make a profit? Is production and Netflix, do they care about the cast members really? Ultimately, I don't know. Is it just for appearances? Who knows? They're there to make money. They're there to create a dramatic show. But, they're humans, and also there's lawsuits if they do something wrong, production. And also, I think, generally speaking, they're trying to create a real situation. That's what makes Love is Blind so unique, because I can't think of another show where every season it's a new batch of people that aren't reality TV show sort of people. I mean, occasionally they have that, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's not legit, but it's new people who are legitimately using the show as a way to possibly meet their person. It's like you can meet someone at work, you can be set up on a date, you can go on Tinder, you can go on Hinge, you can go on Grindr or whatever, and if those things don't work and this comes around, you're like, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll meet my person. And being on reality TV, maybe that'll be kind of fun. So so I believe that the producers of the show understand that that's what makes Love is Blind so special, in that when you're watching it, it feels more real because it is more real, because the producers have a philosophy and understanding of approach. Now, do they mess with things? Yes. There's editing, frankenbiting. There's probably manipulations here and there, spinning, saving their own ass if there's a problem, you know what I mean? But I like the show, and when I hear from my contact, who could be lying to me completely, but it doesn't seem that way to me, and she doesn't, anyway, so it's just nice to hear that the general approach to alcohol is, hey, if you want a couple drinks, go for it, but we prefer that you don't get hammered. But they don't, I'm not hearing that they say that. I'm hearing that they just try to quietly, like in the pods, like someone's getting too drunk, let's quietly pack up the booze a little early. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for liking this episode or any of the other episodes. I've started to make it a habit that even if I just kind of like a video on YouTube, I'll just click the like button because I think most creators will look at that kind of stuff. It's just nice to see. And I suppose if you don't like what I'm saying, you can give me a thumbs down, make your voice heard, I suppose. And in the comments section, talk amongst yourselves, take care of each other in the comments section. Let's all give each other the benefit of the doubt. And please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.